Ukraine has clawed back pockets of territory and hammered Russian heartlands as Moscow resorts to thermite cluster bombs, and its generals face a dilemma: whether to try and flank or face the fortress belt. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. Before we start today, we have exciting news to let you know that next week we will be bringing you a new show on top of Frontline, as well as Frontline, looking at defence technology. If you're interested in war, if you're interested in kit, weapons and how they're changing, then look out for Arms Race coming next week. We're going to start today with the close fight. Ukraine has regained over the course of February 200 square kilometres of territory. Now, it's been a bit of give and take, but according to the Institute for the Study of War, the net gains over the last month have been 165 square kilometres. Is that strategic? Is it changing the direction of the war? Has Ukraine stopped or reversed the momentum? No, too early to say that. Is it significant? Absolutely, for three reasons. Reason number one, this proves that the myth of Russian invincibility is exactly that. It is a myth. It's a myth that Russia promulgates, that Russia relies on, the idea that their victory is inevitable. Ukraine consistently shows that is not true. They can, on occasion, be fought back. Reason number two, some of these advances to the south and east of Zaporizhia have pushed Russian forces away from that key city. Russian troops had advanced to the cusp of what military analysts call tube artillery range. So Russian forces would have been able to use artillery guns, howitzers, to shell Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia has been hit multiple times by missiles and drones, but it hasn't been close enough to the front lines to be hit by artillery. When that changes, then the rate of devastation in cities accelerates, and so significant for that city that the Russians have been pushed back. Reason number three, the Ukrainian gains around Pokrovsk push Russia back from the fortress belt. Now, Russian forces, as we know, have advanced in Pokrovsk. They've been making gains around Sloviansk in the north, and ever since the Battle of Bakhmut, they've been pushing westwards from Bakhmut into Chasiv Yar. Konstantinivka, stunning, horrific footage we've seen today at the south of the fortress belt, appears to have been hit by thermite cluster munitions. All of this is part of Russia's attempt to capture what is left of Donetsk, the area they've not been able to capture. And it's important for Ukraine because that run of cities in eastern Donetsk is the fortress belt. Incredibly well defended, dug in positions that Ukraine started building in 2014. If Russia can solidify those gains, for example, in the south, in Pokrovsk, that will give its forces the opportunity to come round behind, potentially the opportunity to come round behind and flank the fortress belt. If they can't, then they're going to have to try and face it to come through frontally. That would be much, much harder. We've also heard, in good news for Ukraine, from the Defence Minister Mikhailo Fedorov that Ukraine has managed to dismantle a Wi-Fi, a wireless internet network in Belarus. Why is this important? That Wi-Fi system was being used by Shahed drones for control. So Russia was flying its Shahed one-way attack drones over Belarusian territory to attack Ukraine, and it was controlling them effectively via Wi-Fi. And Ukraine, we haven't got many details, but has managed to dismantle that network. In the words of the defence minister, he said it is having a positive impact in the defence of Ukraine and the defence of Kyiv. Now, we've passed the 4-year anniversary of this bloodbath conflict, and there's been lots of reflection on statistics, trying to make sense of the conflict, and it's really difficult, and sometimes these statistics are so overwhelming they're hard to fathom. 1.8 million casualties. That's the estimate from both the Centre for Strategic and International Studies think tank and echoed by Ukrainian and Western intelligence officials. Try and put that in perspective. I'm going to try and put that in perspective. 1.2 million or thereabouts is the estimate for Russia's dead and injured. That's equivalent to the population of Birmingham. That's England's second city. Now, among those dead and wounded, around 325,000 Russian soldiers thought to have been killed over the last 4 years. That is more than the number of people who live in Nottingham, Newcastle or Brighton. These are big English cities. In the last year alone, according to an estimate published by the BBC Russia service, up to 90,000 Russian soldiers are thought to have died. Now, they've got names, the BBC Russian project have got names for 49,000 Russian soldiers who have died. So they're very confident on that statistic. They predict, though, that it's likely more. It's likely 90,000 based on the information they do have and their knowledge of how much they're likely to have not, how many names they're likely to have not worked out yet. So they predicted, the BBC predicted that the Russian toll last year, 90,000. Now, over the course of last year, as Russia lost up to 90,000 soldiers, it's only managed to gain around 4,800 square kilometres. I'm trying to work that out in terms of death relative to area in a meaningful way, in a way that we can fathom. Take an English Premier League football ground, not just the pitch, but the ground, the pitch and the stadium. That's about 45,000 metres squared. This is sort of back of a napkin maths, but broadly speaking, Russia has lost one soldier killed in action to capture the area of a football ground. Now, if you look at how much territory Ukraine still has left, it's got enough space. So about 80% of Ukraine's sovereign territory still under Kyiv's control. You could fit more than 10 million football grounds into that area. Now, were that a linear projection, that would be 10 million more Russian soldiers required to capture all of Ukraine. Of course, it's not linear. It's not going to unfold like that. But I just want to try and help you grasp what's happening. And there's one more fact. Maybe this is bewildering, but one more way of looking at this conflict. A Sun investigation, which we published last week, revealed that over the last 2 years alone, so since January 1, 2024, Vladimir Putin has dropped more explosives on Ukraine in 2 years than Adolf Hitler hurled at Britain during the entire course of World War II. At least 90,000 tons of Russian munitions dropped on Ukraine. We worked that out by going through around 800 daily updates by the Ukraine Air Force of what was fired at them, converting that into tonnage of missiles and drones. That is more than the accepted figure, the 75,000 tons of bombs dropped on Britain during World War II. But, and people have made a good point, these statistics, which paint a picture of the huge cost Russia is paying and the huge price it's prepared to pay, ignore the national consciousness, both of Russia and of Ukraine. It is etched into Russia's sense of itself that it's prepared to make epic sacrifices, and that's sort of from what it calls the Great Patriotic War, the millions that it lost during World War II. Equally, Ukraine has embraced what in Britain we called the Blitz spirit, the sort of willingness to endure that onslaught in order to defend the country, to defend the idea of the country. That brings us neatly to the long-range fight. We've started with the close-range fight. In the long-range fight, Ukraine has continued to hammer Russian positions. We've seen, in no particular order, strikes on the Druzhba pumping station in Kalikin. That's some 700 miles outside Ukrainian territory. The Dorogobuj fertilizer plant, 200 miles inside Ukrainian territory. Really powerful satellite imagery showing before and after pictures of that strike. More recently, and much closer to home, an oil depot in Luhansk has been hit. A substation, electrical substation in Belgorod, just north of Kharkiv. S-400 and S-400 missile air defense battery destroyed in Crimea. And footage appearing to show, this is perhaps the most significant of the lot, a Flamingo strike on the Votpinsk factory, mechanical machine parts factory in Votpinsk. That is 800 miles inside Russian territory. That factory making components for an array of devastating Russian missiles. So that part of Ukraine's attempt to degrade the Russian war machine. As ever, it's not one-sided. Russia continues its relentless strikes in the other direction. 1,488 missiles and drones fired at Ukraine over the last 7 days. Most recently, overnight, devastating double tap in Sumy in northeastern Ukraine appears to have hit a hotel that I've stayed in. I feel these personally. That's at least the third hotel that I've stayed in regularly on my trips to Ukraine that has now been destroyed. The others in Kharkiv and Odessa. And from Kharkiv, a disturbing report that the first fibre optic drone has reached the city. Fibre optic drones are unjammable. They spool out fibre optic cable like fishing line as they fly, which means they can be controlled at the speed of light, so effectively in real time in 4K, full definition, high definition images to the controller so they can see what they're attacking. Kharkiv is very close to the Russian border. The city sits just south of Belgorod province, but the fact that those drones are now being used to attack the city could be an anomaly. More disturbingly, might be a sign of a shift in Russian tactics, which would just bring a whole new class of weapons into the conflict and into the lives of people living in Kharkiv. Other things worth mentioning this week: Sweden said it intercepted a Russian drone that was flying towards a French nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, that was docked in Malmö. They said the drone took off from a Russian vessel. Swedish military took steps to intercept it. We believe that was electronic warfare, steps to either jam it, crash it. There was no reports or no clarity at the time we're broadcasting of whether the drone ditched into the sea or whether it returned to where it took off from. Ukrainian peace talks continue in Geneva, but they appear to be inconclusive, although President Zelensky has said in an interview with Sky News, Russia is not winning, Ukraine is not losing, and he sees an opportunity for a peace to be brokered between now and November. Poland's Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski has been less optimistic. He suggests that peace is not on the cards at the moment, but interestingly, he talked about how Europe is stepping up to support Ukraine, and he said that America might have predicted that when Donald Trump pulled American support for Ukraine, that Ukraine would have been forced to negotiate to capitulate more quickly. Sikorski said that perhaps America's cards were not quite as strong as they thought they were. And finally, a roundup of some of the most extraordinary footage that we've seen this week before we get to questions. I mentioned that footage of the door gunner in an Antonov shooting down a Shahed-style drone. We've also seen what appears to be the destruction of a Russian MLRS TOS-1A. That's the flamethrower, the rocket launch flamethrower, appears to have been hit apparently as it was reloading, triggering an enormous explosion. And always slightly disturbing to see footage of soldiers in close combat, but we've seen footage of a Ukrainian ground drone appearing to take aim and target with precise shots two advancing Russian soldiers. This is really interesting because I was at a briefing with Western officials this week where one of them said that he believed this year, 2026, would become the year of the ground drone, in the same way that we've seen UAVs, FPVs dominating the conflict, certainly in the sort of last 3 years. He expected to see the role of ground drones increasing much more. We've already seen them, but he expects to see them playing a much bigger part. Logistics, medevac, and like that, actually opening fire, delivering lethal effect to each side's infantry. As ever, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time. Question number 1. Can tech replace people on the front line? Can tech make up for Ukrainian shortages? Well, that example of the ground drone I think is really interesting. That's exactly what it's doing. But equally, drones need operators, and the complications of electronic warfare and all sorts of battlefield logistics mean that operators have to be underneath, behind, and sometimes ahead of the weapons they are using, the UAVs that they're using. So technology is making up in a large part for shortages of people, but you still need people. Question number 2, what would happen to all the foreign technology if Russia were to capture all of Ukraine? It's a very good question. It's certainly a concern for Ukraine's Western allies. When America took a year to deliver Abrams tanks to Ukraine, that was, I understood, because they needed to make sure those tanks did not have a lot of the secret technology in an American version for exactly that reason. They didn't want it to fall into Russian hands. Similarly with the British Challenger 2s, they were not supplied with the most high-tech British armour that can be carried on those tanks. But having said that, Ukrainian technology is leapfrogging well ahead of a lot of the weapons that Ukraine's Western allies have. So whilst some of the longer-range missiles like Starstreak have been very, very useful to Ukraine. Ukrainian drone technology is actually being exported the other way. Ukraine is providing its know-how to its allies including Britain, then manufacturing in their own countries and supplying it back. Why are Ukrainian fighters not shooting down Russian missiles deep inside Russian territory? Well, probably two reasons. Firstly is that Ukrainian fighters, and this speaks to the next question, is why aren't we seeing more F-16s? Ukraine's F-16s are being used in an air defence role, and this comes back to, so they're being used in Ukraine to defend high-value targets in Ukraine from those missiles. The range of the missiles that the F-16s can carry means that they shoot them down close to the target, because were the F-16s to fly into Russian territory, they would be much more at risk of being shot down themselves by Russia's relatively sophisticated air defence network. If the Ukrainian jets were to fly into Russian territory in order to intercept those missiles forward, then the jets themselves would be shot down. Russian strategic bombing aircraft, bombers, are often launching these missiles at Ukraine from 1,000 kilometres or further inside Russian territory. So for the jets to get there to threaten them, they'd have to put themselves at huge risk. Thank you for your questions. If you've got any, please do ask them in the comments below. And remember, next week, do look out for Arms Race, our new show looking at defence technology. We've got a treat in store.